August 1942, a requisitioned mansion called the Fry, hidden in the Hertfordshire countryside about an horneth of London. Before the war, wealthy Londoners came here for weekend recreants. Now, Alsatian Guard dogs patrol the perimeter and the guests scary. Military ranks they earned bick knowing how to solve problems thatchhold not have solutions. Inside the building, Lieutenant Colonel John Dolphin stands before his commanding officers, unveiling something that looks like an elaborate prank. He's brought them a motorcycle, but this isn't any ordinary bike. This machine tips the scales. At just 70 pounds, powered by an engine you'd find laughable on most lawn equipment, and performs a trick that seems physically impossible. It collapses into a metal cylinder about the size of your kitchen trash bin. Watch as the handlebars fold inward, the seat compresses downward, and the entire apparatus shrinks into something you could tuck beneath your bed frame. Nobody in the room is laughing, though. These officers have witnessed the extraordinary creations that emerge from this secretive facility. Weapons that whisper death in silence, miniature submarines engineered to plant explosive charges on enemy warships, chunks of coal that detonate inside locomotive furnaces. The inventions born within these walls at Station 9 consistently appear absurd until the moment they prove devastatingly effective. Dolphin begins his presentation. Picture British paratroopers leaping from aircraft into hostile territory, their boots hitting enemy soil with an urgent problem. Every moment they spend on foot is time gifted to the enemy for mounting a coordinated counterattack. His answer sits before them, a motorcycle designed to tumble from bomber aircraft secured in a standard drop container, strike the earth, and transform into a working vehicle in barely 11 seconds. The brass gives approval. Before this conflict ends, assembly lines will produce 3,641 of these peculiar machines. They'll see action at Anzio, they'll deploy during the Normandy invasion, and they'll participate in the catastrophe at Arnhem. These motorcycles will become one of the war's most brilliant disasters, a machine so exquisitely crafted for an impossible task that it satisfied every design requirement while remaining virtually worthless on the battlefield. This is the Welbike story. The bizarre British motorcycle that fell from the clouds to provide paratroopers with immediate transportation behind enemy lines. The significance of this machine has nothing to do with how many missions actually benefited from its existence. The crisis that spawned the Welbike began on Crete during May 1941. German airborne forces executed Operation Mercury, the biggest parachute assault the world had witnessed to that moment. They paid a horrific price, bleeding over 4,000 soldiers in 7 days, yet they conquered the island. Their victory hinged on one factor: movement. German Fallschirmjäger delivered lightweight motorcycles and compact tracked vehicles via transport planes and gliders. Once their boots touched ground, German troops moved with sufficient speed to crush scattered defenders before they could organize effective resistance. British forces defending Crete possessed no comparable advantage. Their paratroopers landed and proceeded on foot, which meant they engaged piecemeal and suffered defeat. British military planners recognized the obvious lesson. Airborne troops required immediate transport capability. However, the solution had to conform to merciless limitations. Standard British parachute containers measured a mere 51 inches in length, 15 inches across, and 12 inches in depth. Anything dropped to support paratroopers had to compress into that cramped space. These containers would plummet from aircraft at approximately 600 feet, deployed via static line parachute systems, landing in potentially enemy-controlled zones where every tick of the clock mattered. The engineering puzzle appeared unsolvable. Create a working motorcycle that squeezes inside a tube smaller than typical luggage. Keep it light enough for one soldier to transport. Make it simple enough that a man dodging bullets can assemble, and operate it without a manual. Price it cheap enough that its loss in combat becomes acceptable. Station 9 existed precisely to tackle impossible puzzles. Officially designated the Inter-Services Research Bureau, this facility operated from the Freythe estate under absolute secrecy. The same workshops that birthed the Welrod silenced pistol, created specifically for assassination work in occupied Europe, now focused their brilliance on miniature transportation. Lieutenant Colonel John Robert Vernon Dolphin originated the concept. Born near Chester in 1905, Dolphin was an engineer who owned an aerial square-four motorcycle, a machine that reveals he grasped both the practical and emotional appeal of two-wheeled transport. His breakthrough was deceptively straightforward. Begin with the exact container dimensions. Engineer backward from that fixed point. Harry Lester, documented in records as a former racing motorcycle engineer, transformed Dolphin's vision into functioning metal. Lester chose the Villers Junior Deluxe 98cc engine specifically because its horizontal cylinder layout minimized vertical space when the machine collapsed. This engine generated 1.5 horsepower at 3,750 revolutions per minute. To put that in perspective, your typical mobility scooter today produces more power. The design stripped away everything non-essential. Zero suspension components, neither front nor rear, no lighting system. No front brake, only a rear drum mechanism. Minimal saddle cushioning. 10-inch wheels that maintained a low profile but abandoned any pretense of off-road performance. A single-speed transmission with centrifugal clutch eliminated gear shifting but also removed any ability to climb steep grades or accelerate with authority. The fuel delivery system presented a unique challenge. The tank sat below the carburetor, making gravity-fed fuel flow impossible. Lester's solution demonstrated elegance. A hand pump integrated into the tank pressurized the entire fuel system. Training manuals indicated that tanks could receive pre-pressurization before drops to minimize setup time, though how reliably this functioned under actual combat stress remains unclear. When unfolded, the Welbike stretched 52 inches long, 21 inches wide, and 31 inches tall. When folded, it compressed to 28 by 16 by 12 inches, barely fitting inside the CLE container at an angle with the rear wheel positioned against the base. The complete machine weighed 70 pounds dry, roughly equivalent to a heavy piece of luggage, according to training documentation. A soldier could deploy the Welbike and have it running within 11 seconds. Handlebars swung outward on spring-loaded pins and locked into position. The saddle extended upward on a telescopic tube. Footrest folded out. Though, as multiple sources acknowledge, that 11-second figure likely represents ideal training conditions rather than the fumbling reality of assembling unfamiliar equipment while enemy rounds crack overhead. Excelsior Motor Company of Tyseley, Birmingham secured the production contracts, a fitting selection given they claimed status as Britain's first motorcycle manufacturer, having produced their inaugural motorcycle in 1896. The assembly line achieved remarkable efficiency. Frame, engine, and all components received paint in a single operation while still attached. Rubber handlebar grips were swapped for brass and canvas due to wartime material shortages. The initial contract in August 1942 ordered 1,200 Mark I machines at £26 and 18 shillings each, roughly 1,400 pounds in modern currency, designed explicitly as expendable equipment. A second contract added 1,400 Mark II machines featuring rear mudguards. A third brought another 1,241 units with improved fuel tanks. Production peaked at 3,641 complete Welbikes, plus one prototype and 12 pilot models. A fourth contract for nearly 7,800 additional machines received cancellation in June 1943. By that point, larger gliders could deliver proper motorcycles like the Royal Enfield Flying Flea, making the Welbike's painful compromises less necessary. Now, before we examine how this performed in actual combat, if you're finding this deep dive into British wartime innovation fascinating, consider subscribing. It takes just a moment, costs you nothing, and helps the channel continue growing. Right, back to what happened when the Welbike encountered the enemy. The Welbike first entered combat during the Anzio landings in January 1944. Commandos and Royal Marines brought them ashore during beach operations, notably not via parachute drop. This ground assault delivery bypassed the fundamental problem that would haunt the Welbike throughout its service life. That problem was basic physics. The Clea container with Welbike inside weighed considerably more than the paratrooper jumping alongside it. Containers descended faster and touched down potentially miles distant from their intended users. This meant paratroopers had to search exposed drop zones for their motorcycles while Germans fired at them. As one contemporary assessment observed, soldiers wandering drop zones hunting for motorcycle containers rather defeated the purpose and exposed them to enemy fire. On D-Day, the 6th Airborne Division deployed Welbikes during Operation Tonga on the eastern flank of the Normandy landings. Photographic evidence shows Welbikes being taken ashore rather than dropped, suggesting glider or landing craft delivery proved more practical than the original parachute concept. Royal Marines Commandos also brought them for beach operations. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 represented the largest deployment. Welbikes accompanied the British 1st Airborne Division and the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade at Arnhem. Photographic evidence shows Polish paratroopers with Welbikes during the operation. According to after-action assessments, many units failed to reach their intended users due to scatter from airdrops or rapid mechanical failures. The terrain problem proved catastrophic. Those 10-inch wheels necessary to meet the folding dimensions clogged with mud immediately. One source describes the Welbike as virtually useless away from a made-up road. In the shell-cratered, rain-soaked fields of the Netherlands, this was not a minor inconvenience. Many Welbikes were abandoned by troops who found continuing on foot easier. Here's perhaps the cruelest irony of the entire Welbike program. The machine received design at Station 9 specifically for covert operations behind enemy lines. Agents would parachute into occupied Europe, retrieve their Welbike from its container, and speed away to conduct sabotage missions? The SO barely touched it. Multiple sources confirm the same assessment. The Welbike proved noisy and conspicuous, consumed scarce petrol, and delivered little value on rough ground. For agents attempting to avoid detection in occupied France or Norway, a sputtering two-stroke engine announcing their presence was precisely what they didn't need. The Welbike discovered its most successful role far from combat zones. RF ground crews found that the machine was perfect for ferrying messages and personnel around sprawling airfields. The limited range posed no problem on bases, and the compact size made storage effortless. Air crew, particularly those stationed in the Far East, would stow away a Welbike if they could locate one. The motorcycle designed for covert operations ended up mostly shuttling paperwork between hangars. Comparing the Welbike to its equivalents reveals the philosophical differences between Allied nations. The American Cushman Model 53 airborne scooter weighed 255 pounds, nearly 4 times heavier than the Welbike, but it delivered 4.6 horsepower instead of 1.5, reached 40 miles per hour instead of 30, and featured 20-inch balloon tires that actually functioned on rough terrain. It could tow a utility cart. The 82nd and 101st Airborne used 4,734 of them after D-Day. A contemporary British Army evaluation described the Cushman as more purposeful than the British Welbike. The German Kettenkrad wasn't really comparable. This half-track tractor weighed nearly 2,900 pounds with a 36 horsepower Opel engine that could hit 50 miles per hour, carry 3 people, and tow artillery. Germany didn't optimize for size. They optimized for capability. Around 8,345 Kettenkrad were built, delivered inside Junkers transport aircraft or by glider. Britain optimized for compactness and expendability. America optimized for capability and ruggedness. Germany optimized for multi-role versatility. Each approach reflected national industrial capacity and tactical doctrine. Britain had fewer resources and designed accordingly. The Welbike was clever engineering constrained by brutal necessity. Lieutenant Colonel John Dolphin retired from military service after the war and founded the Corgi Motorcycle Company, Limited in 1946, working with Brockhaus Engineering of Southport. He produced a civilian version of his wartime creation. Between 1947 and 1954, 27,050 Corgis rolled off the production line. The civilian Corgi featured a heavier, stronger frame since weight no longer mattered. A larger conventional fuel tank sat between the handlebars and saddle. Eventually, a Kickstarter replaced the hand pump system. The American market version, called the Indian Papoose, sold through department stores in dark maroon. The Corgi succeeded initially in austerity-era Britain, fuel-efficient and practical, but it ultimately failed against Italian competition. Vespa and Lambretta scooters offered better styling, performance, and reliability for similar prices. Production ceased in October 1954. Dolphin himself went on to become chief engineer at the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment from 1951 to 1957. Quite a career progression from designing tiny folding motorcycles to engineering nuclear weapons. The Welbike's influence proved more enduring than the machine itself. The concept of ultra-compact foldable personal transportation directly inspired the Honda Monkey bike of the 1960s and the Honda Motocompo of 1981 to 1983, a folding scooter designed to fit in a Honda City car boot. Every modern folding electric scooter owes something to Dolphin's original insight. Start with the space available, design backwards from there. Today, surviving Welbikes command premium prices from collectors. The Imperial War Museum, London, displays one described as probably the smallest vehicle in their collection. Examples exist at the National Motor Museum at Beaulieu, the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, and the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Private collectors pursue them aggressively. Running documented Welbikes with provenance fetch significant sums at auction, while even unrestored projects attract serious bidding. So what do we make of this weird British motorcycle that dropped from the sky? The Welbike achieved everything asked of it: fit inside a standard parachute container, weigh under 70 pounds, deploy in seconds, cost almost nothing, be expendable. By every metric of its design brief, the Welbike was a complete success. It was also nearly useless for its intended purpose. The container separation problem meant paratroopers couldn't reliably retrieve their motorcycles. The tiny wheels meant mud stopped it dead. The minimal engine meant rough terrain defeated it. The noise meant covert agents couldn't use it. The machine designed to give instant mobility often delivered only frustration, but here's what matters. The Welbike represents something essential about British wartime engineering. When presented with an impossible problem, British engineers didn't abandon the brief. They didn't demand more resources or more time. They built something that met every specified requirement, tested it, refined it, and put 3,641 of them into production in under a year. The fact that the requirements themselves were flawed doesn't diminish the achievement. Station 9 gave the War Office exactly what was requested: a 70-pound motorcycle that fit in a tube and could theoretically let a paratrooper ride away from a drop zone in seconds. That the real world proved less cooperative than the specifications anticipated was a failure of planning, not engineering. The Welbike didn't win the war. It probably contributed little to direct combat operations. But it proved that British engineers could solve any problem put before them, even impossible ones. And sometimes that proof of concept matters more than operational results. The same workshops that produced the Welbike also produced the Welrod assassination pistol, which SO agents actually used in occupied Europe. The same mines that miniaturized a motorcycle also created explosive coal that destroyed German locomotives from the inside. Station 9's legacy isn't measured by any single device, but by the relentless, often unconventional creativity that characterized British special weapons development throughout the war. The Welbike was weird, it was impractical, it was very nearly pointless for its intended role, and it remains one of the most fascinating examples of British engineering under pressure ever created. A machine that achieved the impossible and discovered that the impossible wasn't quite what anyone needed. 70 pounds, 98 cc, 1.5 horsepower, dropped from 600 feet, ready in 11 seconds. That's British engineering, not always practical, but undeniably inventive.